For 12 years, she'd been the quiet force behind her husband's pharmaceutical empire, managing charity galas while he took credit for breakthrough drugs she'd helped develop. But when he strutted into their anniversary lunch with his pregnant research assistant on his arm, announcing she'd be the mother of his heir, he had no idea his wife held the patents to every major discovery. The papers she carried in her designer bag weren't divorce documents. They were proof that she owned the very foundation of his success. What happened next would destroy everything he thought he knew about power, leaving him with nothing but the bitter taste of his own arrogance. This is the story of how one woman's patience became the most devastating weapon of all. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. The Whitmore estate sprawled across 40 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, its manicured gardens and stone terraces speaking of generational wealth carefully maintained. The main house, a Georgian masterpiece built in 1923, had hosted governors, senators, and titans of industry within its ivy-covered walls. Today, beneath a cloudless September sky, it would witness the unraveling of one of pharmaceuticals' most prominent dynasties. Katherine Whitmore stood on the East Terrace, overseeing the preparation of what should have been a celebration. The round glass table had been set for 8, each place marked with hand-calligraphed cards and antique silver that had belonged to her grandmother. White orchids cascaded from crystal vases, their delicate blooms trembling in the gentle breeze. At 41, Katherine embodied understated elegance. Her cream-colored dress was impeccably tailored, her auburn hair swept into a classic chignon that revealed the single strand of pearls she'd worn to every family gathering for the past decade. The champagne should be served at exactly 42 degrees, she instructed Marina, who had managed the estate's staff for 15 years. Dr. Whitmore becomes irritable when it's too cold. Marina nodded, though something in her employer's tone caught her attention. After more than a decade of service, she could read Katherine's moods like a familiar book. Today, there was an unusual stillness about her, a quality that made Marina study her more carefully. Of course, Mrs. Whitmore, and the dietary restrictions. Dr. Harrison is still avoiding shellfish, and Patricia maintains her vegetarian preferences, Katherine replied, her fingers absently adjusting the placement of a fork, though I suspect we may have an unexpected guest requiring accommodation. The statement hung in the air, cryptic yet somehow weighted with meaning. Marina waited for elaboration, but Katherine had already turned her attention to the horizon, where the private road wound through oak trees beginning their autumn transformation. Inside the estate's study, Katherine's twins were engaged in their own preparations. At 22, Emma and James had inherited their mother's sharp intelligence and their father's striking features, though they'd learned to use both assets more wisely than their father ever had. Emma, fresh from her molecular biology degree at Yale, was reviewing a stack of documents with intense focus. James, who'd spent his summer interning at the World Health Organization, watched his sister with growing concern. "You're sure about the timeline?" he asked, adjusting his tie nervously. Emma didn't look up from the papers. "Mom's been tracking this for 18 months. Every transaction, every late-night lab entry, when he thought she was asleep." She paused, meeting her brother's gaze. "Did you really think she didn't know about Singapore?" James exhaled slowly. "I hope she didn't, for her sake." "Mom knows everything," Emma replied, returning to the documents. "She just chooses when to reveal it." The sound of engines approaching drew them to the window. 3 vehicles were making their way up the drive. Their grandfather's vintage Mercedes, their aunt's Tesla, and a third car they didn't recognize, a sleek black Porsche that seemed to announce its own importance. Katherine appeared in the doorway, her presence commanding despite her soft tone. "It's time," she said simply. "Remember what we discussed?" The twins nodded, understanding passing between them without words. They had roles to play in the carefully orchestrated afternoon ahead. The Whitmore pharmaceutical legacy began in this very house, where Katherine's father-in-law, Dr. Edmund Whitmore, had converted the estate's carriage house into his first laboratory. In 1968, from those humble beginnings, Whitmore Pharmaceuticals had grown into a $4 billion enterprise with research facilities spanning 3 continents and a drug portfolio that had saved countless lives. The company's success story was legendary in industry circles, a perfect blend of scientific innovation and business acumen that had made the Whitmore name synonymous with medical breakthroughs. As Katherine descended the marble staircase to greet the arriving guests, she passed the gallery of photographs that chronicled this rise to prominence. Edmund accepting the National Medal of Science, her husband, Dr. Christopher Whitmore, ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange, the day they went public. And there, in a corner that most visitors overlooked, a small photograph of Katherine in a laboratory coat, standing beside a microscope. Few people knew she had been completing her doctorate in biochemistry when she met Christopher at a research symposium 12 years ago. The foyer filled with voices as family members arrived. First came Edmund himself, now 84 but still sharp as surgical steel, his presence commanding despite his slight stoop. He kissed Katherine's cheek with genuine affection. "My dear, you look radiant as always. Where's my son? Don't tell me he's locked in his office on your anniversary." "Christopher is handling a last-minute situation," Katherine replied smoothly, taking Edmund's arm. "He assured me he wouldn't be long." Next arrived Christopher's sister, Patricia Whitmore Jensen, a federal judge whose liberal rulings had made her the family's most controversial member. She embraced Katherine warmly, whispering, "12 years today. How does it feel to have survived over a decade with my brother?" "Educational," Katherine replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Dr. Harrison Whitmore, Christopher's younger brother and the company's chief medical officer, arrived with his new wife Melissa, a former pharmaceutical sales representative 30 years his junior. Harrison had always been the more approachable of the Whitmore brothers, lacking Christopher's ruthless ambition, but possessing a genuine warmth that made him popular with staff. The estate's grand dining room had been transformed for the occasion. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting rainbow patterns through the crystal glasses. The table settings represented 5 generations of Whitmore family china, each piece a small artifact of the family's ascent from middle class academics to pharmaceutical royalty. "Christopher's running late again," Edmund observed, checking his Patek Philippe watch, a gift from the company board on his retirement. "In my day, punctuality was considered a virtue, especially for one's anniversary celebration." "Perhaps we should start with cocktails," Katherine suggested, nodding to Marina. The Veuve Clicquot is perfectly chilled. As champagne was poured, Katherine's phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at it briefly, her expression unchanging, though Emma noticed her mother's fingers tighten almost imperceptibly around the device. "He'll be here within the hour," Katherine announced. "He's bringing someone from the Singapore project to discuss the expansion." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "On your anniversary?" That's quite dedicated, even for Christopher. You know how passionate he is about the Asian markets, Katherine replied, lifting her champagne flute. Shall we toast to new ventures while we wait? Katherine moved through the pre-lunch cocktail hour with fluid efficiency, ensuring each family member felt attended to, while Marina's staff circulated with canapes. To anyone observing, she appeared to be exactly what she had portrayed for 12 years, the accomplished hostess who had traded her promising scientific career for the supporting role of a pharmaceutical executive's wife. I still remember when you were defending your dissertation, Patricia mentioned, settling into one of the terrace's cushioned chairs. Synthetic pathways in immunosuppressant development. Wasn't that the title? Christopher was in the audience, completely mesmerized. Katherine's smile held a trace of something Patricia couldn't quite identify. He was interested in my research on cyclosporine analogues. It complemented his work on organ rejection. And then you vanished from the academic world, Patricia continued, studying her sister-in-law carefully. One day, you're being courted by Merck and Pfizer. The next, you're organizing charity galas. Life takes unexpected turns, Katherine replied, refilling Patricia's glass. Christopher needed someone who understood both his work and his vision. The company benefited from having a unified front. What Patricia didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Katherine had never truly left the scientific world. The estate's sprawling basement, ostensibly converted into a wine cellar, concealed a private laboratory where Katherine had continued her research. Every major breakthrough attributed to Christopher over the past decade had germinated in that hidden space, refined through Katherine's late-night experiments while the family slept. Emma watched her mother navigate the conversation with surgical precision, deflecting personal questions while gathering information. It was a skill she'd observed countless times, but only recently understood. Her mother wasn't simply making small talk. She was conducting intelligence gathering with the subtlety of a master spy. The Singapore expansion must be exciting, Edmund said, joining them on the terrace. Christopher mentioned it could double our Pacific revenue within 3 years. The Asian market requires careful navigation, Katherine responded. Cultural understanding is as important as capital investment. We've been fortunate to find local partners who share our vision. James caught his sister's eye at the mention of Singapore. They both knew their mother had discovered irregularities in the Singapore accounts 6 months ago. Shell companies layered upon shell companies, with funds disappearing into accounts that had nothing to do with Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. There, Mother had shown them the evidence gradually, preparing them for what she called an inevitable restructuring. Speaking of partners, Harrison interjected, checking his phone. Christopher just texted. He's 15 minutes out. Says he's bringing Dr. Chen from the Singapore team. Dr. Chen? Edmund frowned. I don't recall that name from the board presentations. A recent addition, Katherine said smoothly. Christopher has been very impressed with her insights into the Asian regulatory environment. Marina appeared at Katherine's elbow. Mrs. Whitmore, shall we move to the dining room? Katherine surveyed her assembled family. Edmund with his patriarch's expectation of order, Patricia with her judge's eye for truth, Harrison with his easy acceptance of surface appearances. None of them suspected that the woman they'd known for 12 years had been playing a far deeper game than any of them imagined. Yes, Katherine decided, rising gracefully. Let's not keep Christopher waiting when he arrives. You know how he dislikes disruption to his schedule. the dining room filled with the subtle choreography of a family accustomed to formal gatherings. Edmund naturally gravitated to what would traditionally be the head of the table, though he left the actual seat empty for Christopher. Patricia settled to his right, her judicial bearing evident even in this casual family setting. Harrison and Melissa took their places across from the twins, who flanked their mother's position at the opposite end. Before Christopher arrives, Edmund began, his voice carrying the authority of decades leading board meetings. I wanted to discuss the Succession Planning Committee's recommendations. The board is growing concerned about leadership continuity. Catherine's attention appeared focused on adjusting her napkin, but Emma noticed the slight tilt of her mother's head, a tell that she was listening intently. James has shown remarkable aptitude during his WHO internship, Edmund continued, nodding toward his grandson. Several board members have suggested fast-tracking him through management rotations. I appreciate the confidence, grandfather, James replied carefully, but I believe merit should determine advancement, not genetics. Edmund's eyebrows rose appreciatively. Well said, though in family businesses, the two often intertwine. He turned to Emma. And you, my dear, your professors at Yale speak highly of your research potential. I'm considering pursuing my doctorate, Emma responded. Immunotherapy is evolving rapidly. I'd like to contribute to that evolution. In academia? Harrison asked, or within Whitmore? Before Emma could answer, the sound of car doors slamming interrupted the conversation. Through the dining room's expansive windows, they could see Christopher's silver Bentley in the circular drive. But it was the emergence of his passenger that caused Patricia to set down her champagne glass with unusual force. Isn't that the woman from the Mumbai conference? She asked, her judge's instincts for detail serving her well. The one who was so attentive during Christopher's keynote? Katherine rose smoothly. I'll greet them. Marina, please set another place beside Dr. Whitmore. But as she moved toward the foyer, Christopher was already entering with his companion. At 45, Dr. Christopher Whitmore still cut an impressive figure. Tall, distinguished, with premature silver at his temples that suggested wisdom rather than age. His charcoal suit was impeccable, his bearing confident to the point of arrogance. Beside him walked Dr. Lena Chen, a striking woman in her early 30s, whose elegant maternity dress did nothing to disguise her condition. Family, Christopher announced, his voice filling the space with practiced authority. I apologize for our tardiness. I'd like you to meet Dr. Lena Chen, our new Director of Asian Development. The silence that followed was profound. Edmund's expression shifted from patriarchal warmth to cold assessment. Patricia's legal mind was clearly racing through implications. Harrison looked stunned, while Melissa gripped his hand with white knuckles. The twins remained perfectly still, their faces masks of composure their mother had taught them to wear. Katherine stepped forward, extending her hand to Lena with impeccable grace. Dr. Chen, how lovely to finally meet you. Christopher has mentioned your contributions to the Singapore project. Lena accepted the handshake, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Mrs. Whitmore, I thank you. This wasn't quite how I expected, to meet Christopher's family. Life rarely follows our expectations, Katherine replied warmly. Please join us. You must be hungry. Marina has prepared a wonderful lunch. The procession back to the dining room felt like a funeral march despite Katherine's attempts at normalcy. Christopher guided Lena with a proprietary hand on her lower back, seemingly oblivious to the discomfort radiating from every family member. Or perhaps, Emma thought, watching her father's satisfied expression, he was enjoying it. "Marina, we'll need that extra place setting now," Katherine said, her voice betraying nothing of the turmoil beneath, "and perhaps some sparkling water for Dr. Chen." "Actually," Christopher interjected, pulling out Lena's chair himself, a gesture he hadn't made for Katherine in years. "Champagne is fine. We're celebrating today after all." "Celebrating?" Edmund's voice could have frosted glass. "Your anniversary, you mean?" Christopher's smile was razor-sharp. Among other things, he remained standing, one hand on Lena's shoulder. "Since we're all together, this seems the perfect moment to share some news. Lena and I are expecting a son, due in December." Katherine lifted her water glass, studying the way light refracted through the crystal. "How wonderful! Have you chosen a name?" The question seemed to catch Christopher off guard. "We're considering Christopher Jr." "How traditional," Patricia murmured, her judicial composure cracking slightly. "And where will this happy event take place? Singapore?" "Initially, yes," Christopher replied, finally taking his seat. "The Asian expansion requires hands-on leadership. Lena and I will be relocating permanently next month." James and Emma exchanged glances. Their mother had shown them incorporation documents for a new entity, Whitmore Asia Limited, registered solely in Christopher's name, not as a subsidiary of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. The pieces of their father's plan were falling into place, exactly as their mother had predicted. "Permanently," Harrison echoed, his medical mind processing the implications. "But the FDA trials for WP4471 are entering Phase 3. You are the lead investigator. I've arranged for qualified replacements," Christopher said dismissively. "The future of pharmaceuticals is in Asia. Regulations are more flexible. Innovation can flourish without bureaucratic interference." Katherine nodded thoughtfully. "You've certainly been thorough in your planning. Tell me, how long have you been working on this transition?" 8 months, Lena answered, when Christopher hesitated. "Since the Bangkok Symposium." "Ah, yes," Katherine smiled. "The symposium where you presented that fascinating paper on regulatory arbitrage. I read it with great interest." Lena's eyes widened slightly. "You read my work?" "I make it a point to understand anything that impacts Whitmore Pharmaceuticals," Katherine replied. "Your theories about exploiting regulatory gaps between nations were quite instructive." Edmund's fork clattered against his plate. "Katherine, surely you're not condoning this situation." "I'm simply gathering information, Edmund," Katherine responded calmly. "Christopher has made significant decisions that affect the entire family's legacy. We deserve to understand them fully." "What's to understand?" Christopher snapped, his composure finally showing cracks. "I'm expanding our reach into the world's largest market. The company needs fresh perspectives, new energy." "And a new family, apparently," Patricia said coldly. "The current family has become complacent," Christopher retorted. "When's the last time any of you contributed anything beyond showing up for dividends?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marina and her staff had discreetly withdrawn, sensing the approaching storm. Katherine reached into her handbag, extracting a slim leather portfolio. "Perhaps this is the right moment to discuss contributions." Christopher's eyes narrowed as Katherine placed the portfolio on the table, her movements deliberate and unhurried. He recognized the gesture. She'd done the same thing years ago when presenting her research findings, back when he'd first been captivated by her brilliance. But that was before he'd realized her contentment to remain in his shadow, before she'd settled into the comfortable routine of a corporate wife. "If we're discussing contributions," Christopher continued, his voice gaining momentum, "let's be honest about the state of this family. Father, you've been retired for a decade. Patricia plays judge while contributing nothing to the business. Harrison follows protocols I established. And Katherine," he paused, his gaze dismissive, "organizes charity galas." "Christopher," Edmund warned, but his son was beyond stopping. "No, it needs to be said. Whitmore Pharmaceuticals has grown 40% annually under my leadership. I've overseen 12 drug approvals, expanded into 16 new markets. And what thanks do I get? Resistance to every innovation, questions about every decision." He stood, placing both hands on the table, leaning forward with the aggressive posture of a man used to dominating boardrooms. "The Singapore expansion isn't just about markets, it's about freedom. Freedom from outdated traditions, from family members who contribute nothing but expect everything." "Is that what you told Dr. Chen?" Katherine asked mildly. "That you were seeking freedom?" Lena shifted uncomfortably. Christopher explained that Whitmore needed fresh leadership for the Asian markets, that the family was too insular to understand global opportunities. "How fascinating," Katherine replied. "And the ownership structure of Whitmore Asia Limited was that also about global opportunities?" Christopher's jaw tightened. "The subsidiary structure is complex. You wouldn't understand the intricacies." "Try me," Katherine suggested, opening her portfolio. "This is exactly what I mean," Christopher exploded. 12 years of marriage and suddenly you're interested in corporate structures? Where was this? Curiosity when I was building the company? "I've always been curious," Katherine said quietly. "You just never noticed." Christopher laughed harshly. "Because there was nothing to notice. You were content with your committees and fundraisers while I did the real work. And now, when I finally find someone who understands my vision, who shares my ambition, you want to pretend otherwise." He moved behind Lena's chair, placing possessive hands on her shoulders. "Lena has a doctorate from Harvard. She's published 17 papers on pharmaceutical economics. She speaks 4 languages and understands regulatory frameworks across Asia. She's everything." He stopped, but the implication hung heavy in the air. "Everything I'm not?" Katherine finished calmly. "Please continue. This is quite illuminating." Emma's hands clenched beneath the table. James touched her wrist lightly, a warning to maintain composure as their mother had instructed. "The point is," Christopher said, regaining his executive bearing, "Whitmore Pharmaceuticals needs leadership that looks forward, not backward. The board will understand when I present my restructuring plan next week. Whitmore Asia will be the flagship, with operations gradually shifting from this outdated American model." "And the patents?" Katherine asked innocently. "Will those be shifting as well?" Christopher's smile was condescending. "The patent portfolio is a corporate asset. It goes where the corporation goes. All 47 patents currently held by Whitmore Pharmaceuticals," Katherine pressed. "Obviously," Christopher snapped, "including the Series 7 immunosuppressants that represent 60% of our revenue. That's why Lena and I will personally oversee their deployment in Asian markets." Katherine closed the portfolio she had opened and set it aside, untouched. Instead, she lifted her champagne glass, studying the bubbles rising in perfect columns through the golden liquid. The entire table watched her, waiting for tears, for rage, for the emotional collapse that seemed inevitable after such a public humiliation. "How thoughtful of you to explain your vision so thoroughly," she said finally, her voice warm and steady. "And Dr. Chen, you must be exhausted from all this planning. Please, let's not allow the food to go cold. Marina has prepared her famous lobster bisque. It's really quite exceptional." Christopher blinked, momentarily thrown by her response. Lena looked between them, confusion evident on her face. "Katherine," Patricia started, "surely you're not going to just what?" Katherine interrupted gently. "It's our anniversary lunch, and we have a guest. Whatever corporate restructuring Christopher has planned, we can discuss it after dessert." She turned to Lena with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Tell me, have you found a good obstetrician in Singapore? The healthcare system there can be challenging to navigate," Lena answered hesitantly. Yes, Dr. Whitmore arranged for me to see Dr. Nathaniel Huang. He's supposed to be the best." "Oh, Nathaniel is excellent," Katherine agreed. "I met him at the Global Health Initiative conference 3 years ago. He was particularly interested in our work on pregnancy-safe immunosuppressants." She paused delicately. "Our work? I mean, Whitmore's work, of course." Christopher's eyes narrowed. "Since when do you attend medical conferences?" "I've attended every major pharmaceutical conference for the past 12 years, Katherine replied. "Someone needed to maintain relationships while you focused on the bigger picture. The Huang family, for instance, owns the second largest hospital chain in Southeast Asia. Such connections prove valuable." As Marina's staff served the bisque, Katherine skillfully guided the conversation, asking Lena about her research, her family in Beijing, her thoughts on Singapore's regulatory environment. With each question, she demonstrated a depth of knowledge that clearly unsettled both Lena and Christopher. "Your paper on regulatory arbitrage mentioned the Singapore Pharmaceutical Authority's expedited approval process," Katherine noted. "Have you had success with fast-tracking applications?" Lena nodded slowly. "Yes, we've submitted 3 compounds for review. The process is remarkably efficient compared to the FDA." "Which compounds?" Edmund interjected, his patriarch's concern evident. "The Series 7 variants," Christopher answered impatiently. "The ones showing promise for autoimmune applications." Katherine's smile didn't waver. "How interesting. I remember when those variants were first synthesized. Such a breakthrough moment." She turned to Edmund. "Do you remember, Edmund? It was right after Emma and James turned 10. Christopher was so excited he brought champagne to the house." "I remember," Edmund said slowly, studying Katherine with new interest. "Of course, the real breakthrough came with the 7th iteration," Katherine continued conversationally. "The molecular modification that reduced toxicity by 80%. That was, let me think, November 2012. "October," Christopher corrected automatically, then frowned. "How do you remember that?" "Oh, I have an excellent memory for important dates," Katherine replied. "October 15th, to be precise, a Wednesday. You were at the Chicago conference, presenting on something else entirely. The table had gone silent, except for the soft clink of spoons against china. Emma watched her mother with barely concealed admiration, while James maintained his studied neutrality. The silence that followed Katherine's question was deafening. Christopher's face flushed, but before he could respond, Katherine continued in the same conversational tone. "It's interesting how corporate structures can be so complex," she mused, directing her comment to Lena. "For instance, when establishing a subsidiary, the parent company typically maintains controlling interest. But in some cases, individuals might structure things differently. Catherine, Christopher's voice held a warning. I don't think this is appropriate dinner conversation. Oh, but it's fascinating, Catherine insisted. Dr. Chen, in your regulatory arbitrage paper, you discussed how companies could exploit differences between jurisdictions. The section on intellectual property transfer was particularly insightful. Lena glanced uncertainly at Christopher. Thank you. It's a complex topic. Indeed, especially when patents developed under one jurisdiction are transferred to another, Catherine continued. The documentation requirements alone are staggering. Every contributor must be acknowledged, every funding source documented. Edmund leaned forward. What are you getting at, Catherine? Simply admiring Dr. Chen's expertise, Catherine replied, although I did notice one small oversight in the paper. The case study on patent transfers mentioned the originating company retained rights, but didn't address situations where the initial patent filing might have complications. Christopher's hand tightened on his water glass. There are no complications with Whitmore's patents. Of course not, Catherine agreed, although it's curious how many of our key patents list only one inventor. She turned to Patricia. As a judge, you must see interesting intellectual property cases. What happens when patents have disputed inventorship? Patricia's legal mind was clearly engaged. It depends on documentation, laboratory notebooks, dated experiments, witness testimony. Why? Oh, no reason. I've just been doing some reading. Did you know that patent law requires all true inventors be listed? Omitting an inventor can invalidate the entire patent. Everyone knows that, Christopher snapped, which is why Whitmore's legal team is meticulous about documentation. Absolutely. Catherine nodded. Marina, I think we're ready for the main course. As the staff cleared the soup bowls, Catherine reached for her portfolio again, this time extracting a single photograph. She placed it face down on the table. Speaking of documentation, I found something interesting while organizing for the anniversary. Do you remember this, Christopher? She flipped the photograph over. It showed a younger Catherine in a laboratory, standing beside a whiteboard covered in chemical formulas. The date stamp read, October 15th, 2012. Christopher went very still. Where did you get that? From my files. I've always been sentimental about significant moments. Catherine's voice remained light, but something had shifted in the room's atmosphere. This was taken by Dr. Patel. You remember him? He was visiting from Mumbai that week. He insisted on documenting what he called a historic moment in pharmaceutical development. Anyone can take a picture in a lab, Christopher said, but his dismissiveness sounded forced. True, Catherine agreed. But not everyone can explain the formula on that whiteboard. Dr. Chen, you have expertise in molecular chemistry. Would you like to hear about the Series 7 synthesis pathway? Without waiting for an answer, Catherine began describing the chemical process with the fluency of someone who had lived and breathed the science. She detailed each step, each modification, each failed attempt that had led to the breakthrough. Lena's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension. You developed the Series 7 compounds? We developed them, Catherine corrected gently. Christopher and I were partners once in every sense, weren't we, darling? Catherine's hand returned to her portfolio, this time withdrawing a thick bundle of documents bound in legal tabs. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows caught the official seals and notary stamps visible on the edges. She placed them carefully in the center of the table, equidistant from all parties. "Since we're discussing corporate structures and patent holdings," she began, her voice taking on a subtle steel edge it had lacked before, "I thought it might be helpful to review some documentation I've compiled." Christopher reached for the documents, but Katherine smoothly slid them toward Edmund instead. "As Chairman Emeritus, Edmund, perhaps you should review these first." Edmund accepted the papers with hands that trembled slightly, though whether from age or anticipation was unclear. His eyes widened as he read the first page. "These are the original laboratory notebooks. Katherine, these entries are in your handwriting." "Yes," Katherine confirmed. "Every experiment, every modification, every breakthrough in the series. 7 development. Dated, witnessed and notarized contemporaneously. Dr. Patel was quite insistent about proper documentation." Patricia leaned over to read along with her father. The witness signatures, Dr. Patel, Dr. Hoffman, Dr. Liu, these are all respected researchers who all remember the work quite clearly, Katherine added. "I've maintained correspondence with each of them. Their affidavits are included in Section C." Christopher's face had drained of color. "This is absurd. Those notebooks, they must be forgeries." "The forensic document examiner's report is in Section D," Katherine replied calmly. "I hired 3 independent experts. They all confirmed the authenticity of the materials. The ink aging, paper composition, even the pressure patterns of my handwriting are consistent with the documented dates." Lena was staring at Christopher with growing alarm. "You told me you developed Series 7 alone, that it was your signature achievement." Is," Christopher insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Katherine extracted another set of documents. "These are the original patent applications. Note the inventor listed, Dr. Christopher Whitmore, sole inventor." She paused. "Now observe the attached emails from Whitmore's legal department, dated 1 week before filing, asking me to sign an inventorship waiver for simplicity of corporate structure." "My God," Harrison breathed, reading over Edmund's shoulder. "You signed away your rights to your own work." "I was asked to support my husband's career," Katherine said simply. "I was told it would strengthen the company's position to have a clear leadership narrative. One brilliant mind at the helm, not a confusing partnership." She produced another photograph, this one showing her in the same laboratory when the twins were young children. "The twins were 10 when we achieved the breakthrough. Christopher said it would be better if I stepped back, focused on the family, that the board would respond better to a traditional structure. I believed him. I trusted him. So I signed." James spoke for the first time since the meal began. "But you kept copies of everything." His mother smiled sadly. "I kept hoping I'd never need them." Edmund's voice shook with suppressed fury. "Christopher, these patents represent 60% of our revenue. If they're invalidated—" "They won't be invalidated," Katherine interrupted. "Not if we handle this correctly." She turned to Section E of the documents. "These are the incorporation papers for Whitmore Asia Limited. Note the funding sources, all transfers from Whitmore Pharmaceuticals accounts, authorized by Christopher as CEO. Standard subsidiary funding," Christopher attempted weakly. "Except Whitmore Asia Limited isn't a subsidiary. It's a privately held corporation with 100% ownership vested in Dr. Christopher Whitmore, personally." The documents continued to circulate around the table, each page revealing another layer of Christopher's deception. Edmund's face had transformed from shock to a cold fury that reminded everyone present why he had built Whitmore Pharmaceuticals into a powerhouse. "There's more," Katherine said quietly, producing a final set of papers. "The prenuptial agreement Christopher insisted I signed 12 years ago. He was so proud of how ironclad it was. Protection for the family legacy, he called it." Christopher's eyes darted between Katherine and the papers. "The prenup is solid. You get a generous settlement, but no claim on company assets." "Yes, the personal prenup is quite restrictive," Katherine agreed. "But you forgot about the intellectual property assignment agreement we signed as research partners, the one that predates our marriage by 6 months." She slid the document across to Patricia, whose legal expertise made her the perfect person to understand its implications. Patricia read quickly, her eyebrows rising with each paragraph. "This agreement stipulates that all jointly developed intellectual property remains jointly owned unless explicitly transferred in writing with consideration," Patricia summarized. "It also includes a clause that any attempt by one party to claim sole inventorship triggers an automatic reversion of all rights to the wronged party." "That was for our graduate work," Christopher protested. "It doesn't apply to Whitmore developments." "Actually," Katherine corrected, "paragraph 12 explicitly states, the agreement covers all future collaborations, regardless of employment context. Your lawyers never thought to check for prior agreements when you hired me at Whitmore. They assumed the prenup superseded everything." "But it doesn't," Patricia concluded. "In fact, this agreement takes precedence, which means—" She looked up at Christopher with something approaching awe at his stupidity. "Which means every patent you've claimed sole inventorship on actually belongs entirely to Katherine now." The room erupted. Edmund slammed his hand on the table. Harrison gasped. Melissa clutched her husband's arm. The twins remained silent, but their eyes shone with vindication. Lena had pushed back from the table, her face pale. "You lied to me about everything. The patents, the company structure, your marriage. Our relationship is real," Christopher insisted, reaching for her hand. She jerked away. "Real? Like your claim that Katherine was just a trophy wife who couldn't understand business? Like your story about developing Series 7 during all-night lab sessions?" Her voice rose. "I'm carrying the child of a fraud, Dr. Chen." Katherine intervened gently. "You're not responsible for Christopher's deceptions. You're as much a victim as anyone." "A victim?" Lena laughed bitterly. "I'm a cliché, the younger woman who believed the married man's lies about his terrible wife." She turned to Katherine. "You must hate me. I pity you," Katherine replied honestly. "Christopher is very convincing when he wants something. I should know. I believed him for years." Edmund had been rereading the intellectual property agreement with growing comprehension. "Katherine, if this holds up legally, and I believe it will, you don't just own Series 7, you own every major patent Whitmore has developed during your marriage. Approximately 73% of our current portfolio," Katherine confirmed. "I had the analysis done 6 months ago when I first discovered the Singapore scheme." "This is a takeover," Christopher said, his voice hollow. "You've been planning this?" "No," Katherine corrected firmly. "I was planning to continue our arrangement indefinitely. You forced my hand when you decided to steal from the company and abandon your family." Edmund rose from his chair with the authority of a man who had built an empire and would not see it destroyed by his son's greed. "Christopher, Effective immediately. You are relieved of all duties at Whitmore Pharmaceuticals pending a full board investigation. You can't do that, Christopher protested. I'm the CEO, the board. The board will convene an emergency session within 48 hours, Edmund continued. I may be retired, but I remain the largest individual shareholder after... He paused, looking at Katherine with new understanding. After the patent holdings are properly assigned, Katherine stood as well, her movements graceful but purposeful. Dr. Chen, you're welcome to stay while we sort through the immediate concerns. This affects your child's future as well. Lena looked lost, one hand protectively covering her stomach. I need to think. Marina, Katherine called, and the estate manager appeared as if she'd been waiting for the summons. Please prepare the blue guest suite for Dr. Chen. She'll need a quiet place to rest. I should go, Lena said weakly. Where? Katherine asked practically. To the apartment Christopher leased under the company name that's about to be frozen, along with the other assets. You're 8 months pregnant and just received shocking news. Stay tonight at least. Christopher stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is kidnapping. Lena, you don't have to... Stop. Lena's voice was firm despite her pallor. Just stop talking, Christopher. Every word you say makes it worse. She looked at Katherine. Thank you. I'll stay. As Marina escorted Lena from the dining room, Katherine turned to her children. Emma, please call David Steinberg. Tell him we need the emergency protocols activated immediately. James, contact the IT department. Christopher's access to all. Systems needs to be suspended within the hour. The twins moved with swift efficiency, their phones already in hand. They had been preparing for this moment, their mother's quiet lieutenants in a war Christopher never knew was being waged. You can't lock me out of my own company, Christopher said, but the fight was draining from his voice. It's not your company, Patricia stated flatly. It never was. You inherited Dad's position, but Katherine built the modern Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. We just didn't see it. Harrison finally found his voice. The board meeting transcripts. Katherine, you've been sending strategic memos for years. I thought they were Christopher's ideas with your name attached for courtesy. A reasonable assumption, Katherine said. Christopher preferred it that way. Edmund pulled out his phone. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. Harold, Vincent, and Margaret are still in the country. We'll need a quorum to ratify the leadership. Change. Leadership change? Christopher's voice cracked. You're giving my company to my wife? I'm recognizing the person who's actually been running it, Edmund corrected. Katherine, I assume you have a transition plan. She nodded. I've had one. Prepared for 6 months. Pending board approval, I'll assume the role of interim CEO while we conduct a full audit of the Singapore operations and asset recovery. This is temporary, Christopher insisted. My lawyers will tear this apart. Prior agreements can be challenged. The patents were developed with NIH grant funding that required accurate inventorship disclosure, Katherine interrupted. Falsifying federal grant documents is a criminal offense, Christopher. Your lawyers might want to consider that before they file any challenges. 6 months later, the Whitmore estate gardens bloomed with spring vitality as Katherine stood in the same spot, where she'd overseen preparations for that fateful anniversary lunch. But today's gathering carried a different energy entirely, one of renewal rather than revelation. The board of directors had just concluded their quarterly meeting in the estate's converted conference center, approving Katherine's proposal to establish the Whitmore Innovation Institute, a research facility that would partner with universities to develop new pharmaceutical compounds with transparent attribution practices. The Singapore operations have been fully integrated as a legitimate subsidiary, David Steinberg reported, closing his briefcase. Asset recovery was 93%, better than projected. Katherine smiled. And Christopher? Accepted. The settlement. He's teaching at a small college in Arizona, living on the generous but restricted allowance you approved. No contact with company operations, as agreed. Through the French doors, Katherine could see her family gathering on the terrace. Edmund, energized by the company's renewed direction, was engaged in animated discussion with James about the Sustainable Manufacturing Initiative. Emma had taken a gap year before her PhD to help restructure Whitmore's research protocols, ensuring improper attribution for all contributors. Mrs. Whitmore, Marina approached with an unexpected guest, Lena Chen, carrying a 4-month-old baby boy. Katherine's face lit up. Lena, welcome. How is little Michael? Thriving, Lena replied, shifting the baby so Katherine could see his face. The position at Johns Hopkins is perfect. Close enough for visits, far enough for independence. They had developed an unlikely friendship in the months following the lunch disaster. Katherine had helped Lena secure a research position that utilized her genuine talents while providing stability for her son. The baby would know his heritage, both the brilliant and flawed parts, but wouldn't be defined by his father's failures. The twins are excited to see him, Katherine said, gesturing toward the terrace where Emma and James had noticed their arrival. As they walked together toward the family gathering, Patricia approached with a document. The final patent reassignment. Every I dotted, every T crossed. Congratulations, Katherine. You've officially reclaimed your life's work. Katherine accepted the papers, but her attention was on the scene before her. 4 generations of Whitmores gathered not for appearances or obligation, but from genuine connection. The company that had once been built on hierarchy and hidden contributions now operated with transparency and shared achievement. "Mom," Emma called out, "the Journal of Pharmaceutical Sciences accepted your article on ethical innovation practices." "Our article," Katherine corrected, joining the group. "You contributed significant sections." Harold Winters, the lead board member, raised his champagne glass. To Katherine Whitmore, CEO, inventor, and proof that the best leaders are often the ones who don't seek the spotlight. "To the future," Katherine countered, lifting her own glass. "Where credit goes to those who earn it, and families are built on truth rather than facades." As the toast was drunk and conversations resumed, Katherine noticed a package on the side table addressed to her. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a note in Christopher's handwriting. "For what it's worth, you were always the better scientist and the stronger person. See," she closed the note and handed the journal to Emma. "For your research notes, make sure you date every entry." The Whitmore legacy would continue, stronger for having been tested, guided by hands that had always been steady. They just hadn't always been seen.